The deal is done. The papers are signed, and downtown Cleveland just lost its football team forever. At 11:47 a.m. this morning, Jimmy Haslam stood in front of cameras in Brook Park, Ohio, and officially announced that the Cleveland Browns are building a $2.4 billion retractable roof stadium in the suburbs, abandoning the lakefront home they've occupied since 1999 and breaking a promise to the city that brought the franchise back after Art Modell's betrayal. But here's what makes this announcement even more explosive than anyone expected. Haslam didn't just reveal the stadium deal, he revealed that the entire project was fast-tracked and finalized in the past 72 hours as a direct response to the player revolt led by Myles Garrett. According to sources who were in the room when Haslam made this decision, he believes that building a new stadium gives him leverage to keep the team even if players, fans, and the league want him gone, because NFL owners don't force other owners to sell when they're in the middle of billion-dollar stadium construction projects. This isn't about giving fans a better experience. This is a desperate power play by an owner who's losing control of his franchise and thinks a stadium deal will save him. And the reaction from the city of Cleveland, from Browns players, and from the NFL world is pure rage, because everyone can see exactly what this is. Jimmy Haslam using taxpayer money to build himself a fortress while the team he owns burns to the ground. The announcement ceremony in Brook Park was carefully staged to project strength and vision and inevitability, but according to sources who were present, the energy in the room was tense and uncomfortable in ways that revealed this wasn't the celebration it was meant to be. Jimmy Haslam stood at a podium surrounded by Brook Park city officials, architects holding renderings of the proposed stadium, and representatives from the development companies that would be involved in the project. Notably absent were any Cleveland Browns players, any members of the coaching staff, or anyone from the city of Cleveland government. The absence of players was particularly striking, given that this was supposed to be about building a home for the Browns, yet not a single Brown was there to celebrate it. And the absence of Cleveland officials was a stark reminder that this announcement represents a fundamental betrayal of the city that supported the Browns through decades of losing. Haslam began his remarks by talking about vision and the future and creating a world-class facility that would serve Northeast Ohio for generations. He described the proposed stadium as a state-of-the-art venue with a retractable roof, 65,000 seats, 150 luxury suites, and modern amenities that would make it competitive with the best stadiums in the NFL. He talked about the surrounding development, the hotels and restaurants and retail and office space that would create an entertainment district around the stadium. He used all the buzzwords that stadium developers always use: economic impact, job creation, community benefit. But conspicuously missing from his remarks was any acknowledgement of what this move means for Cleveland downtown, any gratitude for the 27 years the Browns spent at their lakefront stadium, or any recognition that leaving downtown contradicts everything the city was promised when the franchise returned in 1999.
When Haslam opened the floor for questions, the first one came from a Cleveland reporter who asked bluntly why the team is abandoning downtown and whether Haslam understands the economic devastation this will cause to businesses that depend on Browns game day traffic. Haslam's answer, according to sources, was revealing in its defensiveness and its focus on his own interests rather than the community's. Haslam said that the decision to move to Brook Park was driven by the need for a modern facility that the downtown side couldn't accommodate, that the city of Cleveland had been unwilling to provide the level of public financing necessary to make downtown renovation viable, and that Brook Park offered incentives and flexibility that made the project possible. What Haslam didn't say, but what sources familiar with the negotiations know to be true, is that Cleveland was actually willing to provide substantial public financing for a downtown stadium renovation, but Haslam rejected those offers because they came with oversight provisions and community benefit requirements that would have limited his control and his profit potential. Brook Park, being a smaller city desperate for development, gave Haslam everything he wanted with minimal strings attached. Another reporter asked about the timing of this announcement, coming just days after the player revolt and Myles Garrett's ultimatum. Haslam tried to dismiss the connection, saying that stadium plans had been in development for months and that the timing was coincidental. But sources who've been tracking this situation say that's not true, that while preliminary discussions about a Brook Park stadium had been happening, the deal was actually finalized in an emergency push over the past 72 hours, specifically because Haslam needed a big move that would change the narrative and give him leverage. According to sources, Haslam's calculation was that if he announced a $2.4 billion stadium project with public and private financing already committed, it would be much harder for the NFL to force him to sell, because the league has historically protected owners who are in the middle of major stadium developments, viewing those projects as too important to the league's long-term infrastructure to risk disruption. The financing structure of the stadium deal, which Haslam outlined in his presentation, is exactly what critics of publicly financed stadiums point to as corporate welfare that benefits billionaires at taxpayers' expense. According to the breakdown Haslam provided, the $2.4 billion cost will be covered through $800 million from Brook Park and Cuyahoga County in bonds and tax increment financing, $600 million from the state of Ohio in grants and infrastructure improvements, $400 million in NFL loans, and $600 million from Haslam himself. That means taxpayers are covering $1.4 billion, nearly 60% of the total cost, while Haslam, who will own the stadium and all surrounding development, is putting up just 25%. And the revenue sharing structure, according to sources familiar with the deal, is heavily tilted in Haslam's favor, with the public getting minimal return on their massive investment, while Haslam captures the vast majority of the profits from tickets, suites, parking, and development around the stadium.
The reaction from downtown Cleveland businesses and city officials was immediate and furious. Cleveland Mayor Justin Bibb held his own press conference within 2 hours of Haslam's announcement, and his statement was one of the most pointed and angry responses any mayor has delivered about losing a sports team. Jimmy Haslam just betrayed the city of Cleveland, Bibb said. He took our tax dollars, he took our support, he took our loyalty through decades of losing, and he's using it to enrich himself in the suburbs while leaving our downtown to die. This isn't about building a better stadium. This is about greed. This is about a billionaire who wants total control and maximum profit and doesn't care who gets hurt in the process. Bibb then announced that the city is exploring all legal options to prevent or delay the move, including potential lawsuits over the Browns' lease at their current stadium, which runs through 2028, and whether the public investments Cleveland made in stadium renovations over the years create obligations that Haslam is violating by leaving. Downtown business owners started organizing protests almost immediately, with plans for a large demonstration outside the current Browns stadium scheduled for this weekend. The economic impact of losing the Browns is devastating for dozens of businesses that rely on 10 home games per year to survive. Restaurants, bars, hotels, and parking operators are all facing the prospect of losing millions in revenue, and some are already talking about having to close or drastically reduce staff. The ripple effects will extend beyond just game day businesses, affecting the entire downtown ecosystem that depends on foot traffic and vitality that the Browns bring. But the most significant reaction, and the one that Haslam probably didn't anticipate or didn't care about, came from Browns players themselves. Within hours of Haslam's announcement, Myles Garrett posted a statement on social media that was brief but devastating. Building a new stadium won't fix a broken organization. This proves everything we said about ownership's priorities. We asked for leadership changes and player treatment reforms. They gave us a stadium announcement. That tells you everything you need to know. That statement, implying that the stadium is a distraction from the real issues, was retweeted and supported by multiple Browns players and generated massive engagement from fans who agree that Haslam is trying to change the subject rather than address the legitimate concerns the players raised. Denzel Ward posted, "A new building doesn't create culture, leadership does." Nick Chubb posted, "Players make the team, not the stadium." And Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah posted, "You can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig." The coordinated nature of these responses suggests the players are intentionally undermining Haslam's stadium announcement and making clear they're not going to let him change the narrative away from organizational dysfunction just because he's building a shiny new facility. The NFL League office response to the stadium announcement was notably tepid and carefully worded. The league issued a statement saying they're aware of the Browns' plans for a new stadium in Brook Park and that any facility project of this magnitude will require league approval and review. What the statement didn't include was any endorsement or celebration of the project, which is unusual because the league typically promotes stadium developments enthusiastically. According to sources familiar with league thinking, NFL officials are concerned that Haslam's stadium announcement looks like an attempt to entrench himself and make it harder to force organizational changes, and the league doesn't want to appear to be supporting that strategy when they're still evaluating how to respond to the player revolt and the broader Cleveland crisis. Other NFL owners, according to sources, are also skeptical of Haslam's stadium move, viewing it as potentially setting a bad precedent where owners use publicly financed stadium projects as shields against accountability. Several owners have expressed concern privately that if the league allows Haslam to hide behind a stadium deal while his organization is in chaos and his players are openly revolting, it sends a message that owners can do whatever they want as long as they're building infrastructure, and that's not a precedent the league wants to establish. The Browns' fan base reaction has been deeply divided and emotional. Some fans are excited about the prospect of a modern stadium with a roof and updated amenities. Others are furious about leaving downtown and view it as a betrayal of the city and the legacy of Browns football. Many fans are expressing a more nuanced view, saying they would have been happy about a new stadium if it was being built by an owner they trusted. But coming from Haslam in the current context, it feels like a desperate distraction rather than a genuine investment in the team's future. The underlying sentiment across most of the fan base, according to social media analysis and fan forum discussions, is that a new stadium won't matter if the organizational dysfunction continues, that Haslam could build the most beautiful stadium in the world, and it won't change anything if he's still making terrible personnel decisions and driving away good players. The timeline for the Brook Park Stadium project, according to what Haslam outlined, is aggressive and raises questions about whether it's actually achievable. Haslam said groundbreaking would happen in early 2027, with completion targeted for 2030, which would allow the Browns to play the 2030 season in the new facility. That's a 4-year construction timeline for a massive project, which is tight but theoretically possible if everything goes perfectly, and there are no delays from legal challenges, permitting issues, or construction complications. But given that Cleveland is exploring legal action to prevent or delay the move, and given the political and community opposition that's building, there are serious questions about whether this project can actually stay on schedule, or whether it will get bogged down in years of litigation and regulatory battles.
The lease situation at the current downtown stadium is one of the key legal issues that could complicate Haslam's plans. The Browns have a lease that runs through 2028, and according to legal experts who've reviewed the lease language, there are provisions that could give the city grounds to sue for breach of contract if the Browns attempt to leave before the lease expires. The city has already invested over $150 million in stadium renovations and improvements over the past decade, based on assurances from Haslam that the team would remain downtown long-term, and that investment could form the basis for a damages claim if Haslam breaks the lease. Cleveland's legal strategy, according to sources familiar with the city's planning, is to use the threat of expensive and time-consuming litigation to either force Haslam to stay downtown or to extract a significant financial settlement that compensates the city for its losses. As of now, Friday, February 20, 2026, the downtown stadium era for the Cleveland Browns is officially over in practical terms, even if legal challenges might delay the physical move. Jimmy Haslam has committed to Brook Park, burned his bridges with downtown Cleveland, and bet that a $2.4 billion stadium project will give him the leverage to keep ownership despite player revolt, community opposition, and league concerns.
Whether that bet pays off or whether it becomes another catastrophic miscalculation in Haslam's long history of failures remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, the Cleveland Browns are being torn apart by an owner who seems more interested in protecting his own position than in building a winning organization, and a new stadium isn't going to fix that fundamental problem. Jimmy Haslam officially announced the $2.4 billion Brook Park Stadium deal, ending the downtown era and betraying Cleveland to build himself a suburban fortress. The timing proves it's a desperate response to the player revolt, using taxpayer money as a shield against accountability. Players are publicly dismissing it as a distraction, the city is preparing legal action, and the NFL is skeptical of an owner using stadium construction to avoid consequences for organizational chaos. A new building won't fix a broken franchise. Jimmy Haslam officially announced the $2.4 billion Brook Park Stadium deal, ending the downtown era and betraying Cleveland to build himself a suburban fortress. The timing proves it's a desperate response to the player revolt, using taxpayer money as a shield against accountability. Players are publicly dismissing it as a distraction, the city is preparing legal action, and the NFL is skeptical of an owner using stadium construction to avoid consequences for organizational chaos. A new building won't fix a broken franchise.